Here we are back again.
That's
Charles
right.
and Einar, speak softly. We got a lot of topics today.
I don't think we'll be speaking softly today, given the subject.
Well, and a tough one. Boeing loses out completely to Airbus.
292 planes.
Yeah, but I mean, we're talking over the next 20 years, a $1.5 trillion market in China alone. And that's Boeing's estimate.
That's right.
So at this juncture, it looks like Boeing is being shut out of the market. But you're starting to hear all these people in the US saying, oh, this is unfair. Boeing says, well, why isn't there a good dialogue? What part of the every day China is bad? Every day we're going to put people on the sanctions and companies on the sanctions list. We don't want to give them any technology. What part of this is welcoming and says, yeah, let's do business?
That's even more than that. I think there are some technical reasons as well, because the MAX, the 737 MAX, has had a lot of problems. And the FDA has already, not FDA, what is it? The FAA has already identified a whole series of issues.
Well, in the past, it's been certified to fly again, but consumer confidence. Who wants to hop in a plane which, through all of this stuff, it was poorly designed.
That's right.
The FAA allowed Boeing to self-certify, so they didn't go through the certification process. Boeing took an old design and they simply made it longer. And then to compensate, they put bigger engines on it. And then they tried to solve it with software by putting an anti-stalling feature in.
And the glitches started to come.
And the glitches added up. The poor, the substandard design. It wasn't a complete design like Airbus things. Airbus, on the other hand, is saying, oh, this is just a victory based on our planes and how good they are and things like that. But
the Neo is better.
Is this a pattern?
I think it is a pattern.
I mean, not just for Boeing. I mean, I'm talking about, is China going to go towards Europe and ignore the US? I mean, after all, Europe makes everything that the US makes. So they're actually the biggest competitors. And now, this is a stark reminder that America is about to lose its lunch in China.
This is also a stark reminder of how incredibly valuable the Chinese market is. Because this 292 planes, I think, is only a very small part of what China will be needing in
8,000
exactly.
planes just in the Chinese market.
That's right.
1.5 trillion.
That's right. Yeah. And the Neo, the European plane, is designed for medium and short-term distances.
Yes, but there's a new entry in the market, and that is China's own National Aviation Corp.
Not quite ready yet.
It's not quite ready, but they're about to release their plane. And it is a direct competitor in this market.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking, if we're talking about the next 20 years, 8,000 planes, 1.5 trillion, and you're talking about mass market. I mean, one of the issues with Airbus, though, is the cost. Because they for political reasons, they don't put it together in one place. They actually have special boats to move the entire fuselage from one place to another place for assembly. So they move it literally by water into France so that they can do this. And this is for political purposes, but it isn't cost effective. If China does what they generally do, which is mass assembly, lower priced labor, I think it's going to be a real tough
and
sell.
Logistics and supply chain.
Well, look at what China's done with fast rail.
By the way, where do you think these 292 planes will be doing its final assembly?
Oh, in China, because Airbus has an assembly plant in Tianjin.
Exactly. Yeah. That's going to be part of the economics.
But I think Boeing has a paint plant or something like that, but I don't think it's the same thing. So, yeah, let's move on to the next thing. NATO shifts to Asia.
Well, we've been talking about this for quite some time. I remember 3 or 4 months ago, we had talked about this. There's no question that U.S. is pushing NATO further eastward.
But isn't it more than that? Isn't, in essence, the U.S. used to be the policeman of the world, and it was funding these wars and all these things in the name of preserving liberal democratic capitalism. Now it seems that it has shifted the cost to Europe.
That's right.
Because NATO requires 2.5% of your budget. They've all hopped into line. Why? Because of the Ukraine situation. Who pushed
Created,
who pushed the Ukraine situation? The US
Yeah.
was pushing this. I actually was doing an interview with a guy who was nostalgic about the Cold War times when we were all united, when we knew where the line was, we knew who the enemy was. I couldn't believe it. This guy was actually going on and he was just saying, oh, those were the good days. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a topsy-turvy world. When you think that a Cold War is the way that you manage the world, that being on the brink of nuclear disaster, incredible. But now the US has pushed the policeman of the world role onto NATO. And now NATO is going on, which was supposed to be about European defense, is now the policeman of the world. It's going to go
North Atlantic, right?
North
Atlantic. No.
Yeah, but
Well, it's not going to make very much of a difference. I think it's quite superficial. The U.S. is looking for deputy sheriffs in the in Asia, and you're basically looking at possibly Japan, and a very distant deputy sheriff in Australia.
But how far does this go? I mean, they're obviously using Taiwan as a card, but 90% of U.S. chips come from Taiwan. How do they manage that?
Even more than that, using Taiwan. I think if we looked at how the U.S. has tried to use other countries among the ASEAN nations over the course of the last decade, they failed.
They failed so far, but you never know. I mean, they haven't failed in Europe. I mean, Finland and Sweden have now signed on. So now you're having really hardened borders between Russia and Europe.
Well, but I don't see this U.S. being able to handle Europe and Asia at the same time.
I know, but I mean, it's
the meeting with the ASEAN.
Yeah.
The meeting with the ASEAN, the results are again totally superficial, no substance. You know, $120 million.
Well, even New Zealand
Yeah.
has kind of said, no, we're not joining NATO and
That's
this
right.
type of thing. And
That's right.
This isn't where we want to be. But how would you define what's happening in Sweden and Finland? Somebody says, what does this mean?
Further pressure on the Russians.
Yeah, but I see it as an emotional response. They're buffaloing everybody. I mean, they're literally, saying, oh, look at the evil Russia. Oh, you have to join our group or they'll attack you. Russia has no intention of attacking Finland or Sweden.
No.
All right. But the question is Finland and Sweden, are they safer or less safe because of joining NATO? I would argue that
They're
now
less safe.
They're less safe because
right.
they're pushing the brake. This is exactly what happened in World War I.
Yeah.
Everyone started forming alliances against the other on the theory that my group is too big to fight.
Let's go back to another issue of sanctions, right? Sanctions has proven that European governments are incompetent. How can they not expect?
Why don't you just say what you mean, Charles?
No. What do they expect if sanctions are put in on oil and gas from Russia? Prices will go up. Do they take that into consideration? Do they care?
No, that's my question
Yeah.
to you. Do the Europeans have a full understanding of what's happening?
They don't. And this thing about
But are
joining
they-
NATO.
Yeah, but
is
they're going to
the same
wake up in a
thing.
hurry in 3 or 4 months when
Winter.
months when winter comes. They can't heat their homes. Food is sky high.
Yeah.
Right. They have refugee issues. The EU has now committed to rebuilding Ukraine. They don't even know what the price. $750 billion.
Yeah.
But that's based on whatever they have now. If the war continues, or the conflict continues, what? It's going to be more.
That $750 billion is not going to come.
But I don't think people realize that Ukraine today has a per person GDP of around $2,000
That's
dollars per year.
Right.
Per year.
Yeah.
All right. Now they're being invited into the EU and also
OECD.
the OECD. The OECD, I thought that was a rich country thing, right? This is going to take the OECD
Average
averages
down.
way down.
Take down the average.
And even for the EU, it was very clear. In 2019, they were pushing to join. But there are very strict criteria about governance, the courts, corruption, accounting, all of these things. They had none of them, none of the criteria. 2 years later, they still have none of the criteria, yet they're being brought in with open arms. This is a population equal to 1/10 of Europe currently. They're going to add them on. How is this possible?
I think overall, the attempt to create this Quad economic framework, the attempt to create a new U.S.-ASEAN alliance, all of this are going to fall apart because there's really no substance. It's the same thing when you start changing OECD, when you start changing
all these groups in order to accommodate NATO,
That's right.
the EU, all of
just
these
for
things.
short-term purposes without any strategic vision.
But when, okay, let's make a prediction here. When do you think the wake-up call will be in Europe? When do the populists say, listen, this Ukraine thing isn't going away, and I have my children to feed and keep warm?
I think by the end of this year.
I'd agree.
The inflation rate, for example, in
we're
Eurozone.
going to put this down for January.
Yeah.
And we're going to come back to this and see how we did. I agree with you. I think it's going to be bad. You're going to start to see people actively, the people saying, look, we don't have enough to give away to other people at this juncture. It's
That's
time
right.
to get rid of the refugees and go back to taking care of our own.
That's right.
Yeah. So, another mass shooting on the 4th. Another reminder of America's gun problem, increasing political, economic, and social divide. What can you say?
On Independence Day,
Yeah.
automatic rifles,
7 people dead now.
7 dead so far, and 30 some wounded, I think.
Yeah.
50, 60 rounds. And apparently, the guy had run-ins with the police.
Yes, he had. And yet he was able to buy 5
Rifles.
How many rifles do you need? 5 rifles
firearms,
legally.
Yeah.
And then
Legally,
get up,
exactly.
get up on a rooftop.
Yeah.
And nothing in the legislation that was passed by the Congress would have changed anything about that, because they said in monitoring, red flags, things like that, but they don't have any mandates about how you establish those. It's all left to the
By the
local
way,
police.
in that context, his run-in with the police, I think they found him with 16 knives. They confiscated the knives. And his father went to the police and said, oh, these are mine. They gave it back to him. And the very night he was arrested, he was out on bail. If America wants to run its country that way, let them.
Yeah, but I mean, this is something I'm going to keep repeating. The first duty of government is to assure your safety in the public and at your home. On your Independence Day, when you're afraid to walk in a parade, that tells you that in essence, the government's first duty has failed.
That's right.
And there's really no other way of putting it.
We've seen that in so many instances, in terms of the government's first duty of taking care of its people.
But isn't that what human rights are? I mean, within a society, your human rights don't exist if you're by yourself in the forest.
That's right.
Your human rights are necessary when you're in a collective group of people, where you have to draw the line between government and the individual.
Yeah.
Where does safety come in? I mean, don't I have, if I'm in a society, don't I have a human right to feel safe, to be safe?
That's right. From weapons, also from hunger, also from...
Well, you need education.
Exactly.
There are so many things. But I mean, these are things that are necessary for the society to function. If people don't have an education, they can't contribute.
That's right.
If there are guns around and they're in fear of their lives and the lives of their children and family, that doesn't work. If you cannot get medical care, all right, that's another issue. So it seems that the U.S. is failing on almost all of these fronts.
That's right.
But the anger is being directed outward.
Outward.
And even inward. So let's talk about this young man. 60 bullets.
60 bullets.
90 bullets fired. 60 bullets in him.
And the body, when they went to the coroner, had handcuffs on.
Yeah. Now, this is a report. It has not been verified.
Confirmed,
but if this is true, I mean, I mean, you've filled the boy full of 60 bullets. He's not getting up again. All right. And the idea that you would handcuff him to take him to the coroner's office.
Even
treat him
animals
like meat.
get better
Well,
treatment.
yeah, I've never seen somebody with a dead buck on their hauling it back home
Yeah.
with handcuffs on
Yeah.
its feet. I mean, it really says something about society in America.
American
how great the divide
society.
is.
And
But I mean, Black Lives Matter. I mean, there are real problems with the movement, but the idea, all right, that there is real inequality in America,
real racism,
real racism.
very, very deep.
You know, the issue with the number of attacks. 5-year-old girl, Asian girl, Japanese American, attacked by some racist hoodlum. They were walking
Walking on the street. Yeah.
You know, once again, you can't walk the streets.
No safety.
No safety.
I think ultimately, in terms of this, the racism is going to get worse because the minority population has been increasing very rapidly.
But it seems to be not only minority population, but also the poor.
Yeah.
America was built on a strong middle class. It's
Yeah.
the solid rock of keeping everything stable. But now it is shrinking, and
The middle class is shrinking.
Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about middle class values. I mean, Roe versus Wade overturned. I mean,
50 years.
You know, the U.S. was at the front of legalizing abortion, and now it has done a 180, while the rest of the world has gone forward, has recognized that conception is not a divine matter. It happens in rape. It happens in war. It is not God's way of making things equal.
It comes back to the 1960s again, 50-some years ago. The right to abortion, woman's right to decide what to do with its body, her
human
body.
right.
It's a human right. Against the war in Vietnam, civil rights, gerrymandering,
Same.
like in Congress. All of this were very, very strong topics that was propelling the society forward toward more fairness, more justice for all.
But it failed.
Now,
Obviously, it failed
it
because
failed. Now
we're right back gerrymandering.
Yeah.
The Republicans are making no bones about the
That's
fact
right.
that they think it's their right,
Yeah.
if they're in the majority, to make sure that for the next 10 years, minorities and Democrats are underrepresented in the state, not by numbers, just merely by manipulation, and also
They do
increased
that on an international basis.
voter
as well.
registration drives. But
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things, getting back to Roe versus Wade, I don't understand. I mean, if you went to 99% of Americans said, do you want Sharia law enforced on you? And they would say, absolutely, that we're Americans, we're free. We don't, no one can force that kind of stuff, their religion on me. Yet in Roe versus Wade, you have a small vocal minority, 30%, who absolutely insist that they have the right to impose their religious views on others.
That's right.
How is that different from somebody who has a radical view, regardless of what religion, Muslim or otherwise? How is that different from radical Christianity?
Yeah.
This idea that I know you don't believe, but I'm going to make you adhere.
If you don't believe, I'll chop your head off. This is
How are we getting close to that? I mean, they're right now saying that they're going to hunt down any woman who gets an abortion.
that's right.
They're going to find her and they're going to put her in jail. It's a criminal matter.
It's headed in that way
Yeah.
in the U.S. It's headed
So
in that direction.
I can see it. He says, well, let's burn them at the stake if we find that
Yeah.
they've had an abortion, or put them in jail for life, or it's punishable by death. I mean, it just doesn't. It's surreal. You couldn't have imagined this 10
Especially
years
for
ago.
those of us who went
were
through
there.
the whole process
Yeah.
of seeking the change to make it better.
Supreme Court's Clarence Thomas on the gun things. What I find interesting here is you have an African American who benefited from affirmative action.
That's right.
All right, even in his autobiography,
Yeah.
he admits that he was given opportunities because of his color.
That's right.
Writes the majority decision about guns, gun ownership. It was a law in New York that allowed people, that said you couldn't have guns in the city or carry them around. And he writes, he said, basically, the originalist position, and these guys are now the majority in the court, they believe that the only legitimate way to govern America legally is to look at the intent of the founders of America. So that's 240 years ago, when they signed a document saying that African Americans counted for 3/5 of a human being, that they couldn't vote.
Yeah.
There's no right to hold land.
Women cannot vote.
But women couldn't vote. So, yes, there has been legislation since then. But can you imagine African American guys saying, well, I really want to know what these guys thought because they had the key to all knowledge, not only then, but in the future.
It becomes a religious belief.
Exactly. The Constitution has become a Bible,
Yeah.
and everybody has their own interpretation. And this guy is actually saying that for guns, he didn't draw legal precedents. He said, well, if they didn't allow guns in the legislature, all right, and at polling places, that's okay. There's no law on there. But since they accepted it without having a law or whatever, that's okay. That's a limit. I don't even understand that argument. How do you go back and figure out what people thought 240 years ago?
And also, in terms of 240, of course, things are totally different today. There was a word in the Constitution that is being also taken up. The word is legislature.
Ah, yes. Okay, so people watching this, if they don't know, United States, 50 states. Each one has 2 senators. Each one has a number of congressmen according to the number of people that they have, and they're every 10 years are redistributed. But that puts the majority of the power legislatively, all right, in the Republican hands, because what happens is small states that tend to lean conservative have 2 senators, no matter what.
That's right.
They have 1 House of Representative,
Yeah.
a member, no matter how small the
That's
state
right.
is,
Yeah.
no matter how out of proportion it is to, let's say, California, all right, where they require a much larger number in order to have a representative. So this is skewing America. And they're not only doing it at the top level, but
At
as
the
you
local
said,
level.
at the local level. They're saying the state legislatures can control everything, and no one can review it.
What that means is the splitting up of America, the polarization is just going to get worse and worse.
But doesn't that go to something that you and I learned in school, that there is a separation of powers, that it's equal, that there's a legislative, executive, and judicial, and that they are meant to keep in check each other, so that there is no one supreme entity. This legislative, defining legislative, it would in essence say state legislatures cannot be reviewed, they cannot be questioned.
They cannot even by a court.
They cannot be questioned.
Yeah.
So what do the state legislators do? They are the ones who certify the election. So they can literally send whoever they want.
Interesting
and say,
for 2024.
Yes,
isn't it?
exactly, and very deliberate. And there are people who have been endorsed by Trump who are running on this. That we seize the legislatures, we can put in any electors that we want and have them vote the way we want.
That's the originalist again.
Because the courts cannot question us. There is no way they can do it. Let's see what happens at the Supreme Court level. Janet Yellen and the Fed. Where is the Fed going? I'm telling you, she seems to be going one way. Very practical. Let's talk to China. Let's get rid of the tariffs. The Fed says we can control everything with monetary and fiscal policy.
Good luck.
How do you control food shortages
That's
with
right.
fiscal policy?
Supply chain breakdowns. How do you contain the results of your sanctions against Russia on energy prices, on fertilizers, on food? You can't.
Well, let's talk about Janet Yellen. I mean, we were talking earlier about Japan. All right.
Well,
They're selling treasuries.
That's right.
Six out of the top, what, 5 out of the 6 top countries who,
All 6 of the
all
top
6 of the number 1 holders of U.S. treasuries have been selling over the last 3 months,
That's right.
including Israel.
That's right.
U.S.
And the
gives-
UK even
UK.
lapdog UK.
Well, but, I mean, it's very interesting. The countries who the U.S. is saying, here's our core, here are the people who support us, here are the countries that stand behind us. They're selling U.S. treasuries.
No, I think in terms of the Fed, there's no question this inflation is getting out of hand.
Yeah.
Of course, 8.6. I think this month's numbers will also be quite horrendous. It'll be probably closer to 9. Even the Eurozone is reaching closer to 9. England is over 9.
Over
yeah.
9. They like to lead the pack.
Yes. But you have a situation in which the commodity prices have been falling because of the anticipation of a recession. So there will be no demand. But the cause for the inflation is not due to the decline or rise of the commodity prices alone.
Yeah, but people got to separate. Yes, oil is coming down, but it's still around 100.
Yeah.
The other issue is that, I don't consume as much iron ore,
No.
but I still consume the same amount of food because I need to live.
Yeah.
If there's a shortage of food, all right, and energy prices remain high.
I think market demand is really not the key issue here. It's restriction of supply. Restriction of supply from sanctions, restriction of supply from supply chain issues, from the COVID-19 global economic breakdown,
Russia.
and
Ukraine.
Russia, of course. And that's the sanctions part. So those are the core issues that has brought about the inflationary pressures. So whether or not a slower economy can resolve the inflation pressures completely, it's hard to say. Because you have another issue, for example, Janet Yellen and Liu He's conversation talks about, maybe lifting the trade customs,
The tariffs.
Tariffs on Chinese goods. Now, I wonder, Walmart and the others, if they have a cheaper Chinese product, would they pass it on to the consumer?
Oh, absolutely. You think that profit? Last night there was last few days have been talking. Goldman Sachs and all the others have been talking about profitability
Of
these.
the S&P 500 companies.
Yeah.
And they're talking about how, at least into next year, the profitability will see some suffering.
So if there are cheaper Chinese goods, you don't think that they're not all the savings are going to be passed to the consumers?
I don't think it'd be completely passed to the consumer.
Is this a problem because the United States has so many in like a Walmart, for instance, has not complete dominance, but such a major share
Yeah.
and huge logistics change
Yeah.
that they can literally, it's not always about making competing. Sometimes it's about taxing.
You
their
heard of an
customers.
expression called oligarchy?
Yes.
Oligarch.
Yeah, but I mean, it really seems to be coming back to bite the U.S.
Yeah.
And in other countries where this happens, where you have the markets dominated by, on the consumer side especially, the irony is in China, the big companies are doing things like, building oil platforms,
Yeah.
fast trains,
Yeah.
airplanes, construction projects. Not exactly things. I mean, at some point maybe they do open up to competition, but very different from an Apple or a Google who literally has you in
That's
their
right.
clutches one way or another.
That's
And
right.
where can you go?
Well, the original projection by the Peterson Institute was that if all of the tariffs are lifted, inflation rate would drop by 1.3%.
Yeah.
Now, that, number one, is very idealistic because for face, the U.S. will not lift everything.
No.
They will leave some national security items. They will leave some high technology items and so on and so forth.
Tech will be off the table and maybe even still steel and iron ore.
Yeah. So you end up probably with only a portion. For phase, the U.S. will have to only leave a portion.
So let's say it's
1%.
more than half, 1%.
Yeah.
It still helps,
Yeah.
but it's not going to help enough, not with things going the way they are.
There's another, that ties into another very important question, is the reason the commodity prices have fallen a bit, 6 to 10% over the course of the last 2 weeks, is everybody now is talking about recession is coming. Recession comes, there's no demand, or lesser demand, and the demand reduction will reduce the cost of commodities. So the speculators started to pile into this.
But in the past we've had stagflation where costs continue to rise, prices continue to rise, even though the economy has slowed down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clearly we're in that situation because we have prices going up and we have massive inflation,
Mm-hmm.
and it hasn't equaled out. And I think this is a real major hole in where the Fed and everybody is thinking about it. Let's go on to Japan. Last 10 months, you pointed out they have been
trade deficits for 10 months.
Now, they're one of the trade powerhouses. They always have this surplus. What do you think
decades now.
What do you think is happening?
For decades now. I think one of the things is Japan has been printing money, keeping negative interest rate, zero interest rate, keep on printing money.
A lot of that money ends up in the U.S. Treasuries.
Well,
because if I can borrow for zero and then put it into the U.S. and
even at 1.5%, it's okay.
It's money in my pocket, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a carry currency. But what we see in Japan's case is the supply chain issues, logistics, cost of shipping, that's one. The cost of increasing energy, the cost of moving components around. All of this is very, very bad for Japan, especially since the Japanese yen has fallen 15%, in the last 4 or 5 months.
They import basically all their energy and all their food.
Everything.
So it's going to hit them. Their inflation numbers have been relatively low. It's doubled in real terms, but it's not at the 8.5%. The question is it coming? And if that does come, what does that mean to the Japanese economy?
I think the Japanese economy will be living off its assets abroad.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't understand that the Japanese companies are located all over the world. They have factories in the U.S., they have factories in Europe, Mexico, Africa, India,
Southeast
China,
Asia.
even in South Korea. There's large production facilities there. So they can continue living. That means the corporations go on, but what happens to the people? Are we looking at an economic collapse or a danger of one?
I think there is a serious danger. Given the aging of the population, and last year I think a significant number more people died than were born.
Well, that could have been to COVID and things like this.
Could be
But
but the impact, if you really think about it, Japan's impact will be very serious for Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Very serious.
The amount of demand and the issues the things that they supply, because there's still a lot of the high-tech memory and things like memory chips and other computational chips that are still made in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still a demand for that, so perhaps those continue on. But I'm worried about the Japanese people. What is going to happen to these elderly people who are depending on the government when inflation goes up?
So the government has to continue to print money.
But at some point, you have a situation like Germany in the 30s, a failing government that's printing money, massive inflation.
1930s.
Yeah.
Militarization.
And that is something, I mean, it's a projection. This isn't saying it's going to happen, but we're seeing the same things happening, all right? These economic collapses, the inability of governments to handle the real situation, and therefore going to the easy route, printing money, that leads to hyperinflation. And then somebody comes along and saying it's simple. We've been cheated. It's time to take our national birthright and take over the world, or take back all the things we lost when we were brutally colonializing the rest of Asia. I mean, those specters are still there. July 7th, 84th anniversary of the
Invasion of Japan, invasion of China by Japan.
Sony
Yeah.
Hitachi
Lugo
are having a big sale on that day. Is this a slap in the face of China, or do they think people don't remember, or?
Well, I think they're trying to recreate history so people would not remember.
Not remember. I'm going to hold a sale on the day that we invaded you, and you that way you remember the sale, but not the day you invaded me.
Sale, introduction of brand new products, several top Japanese companies.
Yeah, the last product, 84 years ago, they introduced a product that was called an invasion.
Invasion, yeah.
And it didn't go well. I mean, the number of people who were brutally killed, and never an apology.
That's right.
So at this juncture, it seems like they don't care.
They don't care.
This current government, they were supposed to turn a new leaf. This guy was supposed to be something different, right? It seems that he's back to Shinzo Abe's original failed economic policies.
Economics, yeah.
But is there any hope for China given the political structure? I mean, this is a democracy. They're supposed to be able to vote out bad governments, but it just seems they go from one bad government to the next bad government without any real change.
They had a hell of a lot of prime ministers over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, but it hasn't made any difference.
It hasn't made any difference.
So this idea that you can change the government doesn't necessarily mean you can change the
I think
direction.
it's very difficult to change the government and hope to change the direction, because Japan still, no matter how they would like to have more independence, more normal status, is still dominated and controlled by the U.S.
The Plaza Accord in '86.
Yeah, it was
that
very
really
clear.
that was, and ever since that time, there was a few years afterwards where there was increases, but it seemed more like momentum.
Yeah.
And then after that, Japan has literally been going sideways. Meanwhile, China has cut its own path, and it's done very well over the same period.
Can you imagine what it means when Japanese yen, which was at about 250, appreciated to nearly, I think at one point, the high point was 80.
Yeah. Making their products
much more expensive.
Well, uncompetitive.
Uncompetitive.
South Korea
That was the idea.
Was able to build up its economy based on these price differentials. And then China benefited, but not because its own companies were doing this, but because American, Japanese, South Korean, European companies were coming to China and using the low-cost labor to make more money for themselves. The top nations during this last 30 years, they may have lost market share in terms of jobs, but they had 2/3 of the world's profits in their pocket.
That's right.
But none of it seemed to make its way to the middle class. Is this short-sighted by the elites? Are they literally cutting away the foundation of their own wealth and power and stability?
I don't think they think that long term. Corporate executives, top CEOs.
But they must, because I know a lot of these families. They're thinking about 4 generations in the future, creating trusts to make sure that the future is taken care of.
You're talking about family offices and so on. But corporations don't run that way. They run on a quarterly basis, the quarterly numbers. And whatever you can squeeze out, you squeeze out. Whether or not it screws up the society in the long term, do they care? They don't.
Talking about the future, we talked a little bit about commodity prices dropping. We also are looking at a recession. We also talked about how things are, next January, we're going to revisit this issue about what's happening in Europe and in America. I mean, when do you expect the recession to really hit? And how long do you expect it to be?
Well, the legal definition of recession,
2 quarters.
2 quarters of continued negative growth. We had 1 quarter already negative. I think it was about 1.4, minus 1.4%. Revised numbers, I think it's probably about minus 1.5. What does this quarter look like?
I don't think it's looking good.
That's right.
They've been revising things down and down, and the numbers are coming out pretty soon. So we'll see. But I think it's going to be down again. But the issue is, I'm just trying to figure out when is it going to go back up. The Fed is racing to raise interest rates so that they have ammunition to reinflate the economy. But the question is, when are they going to do this? How much ammunition can they make? I mean, they 0.75% increase in the rate, unheard of.
We'll see another one soon.
They see another one, then another one. But at that pushes, it squeezes anybody who took a loan.
It squeezes not only loans, I think it will also squeeze the housing market as well. Mortgage rates have been.
But if I'm an investor, I'm not going to create a new manufacturing plant
No.
with high cost money at a time of
That's right.
decelerating economy. I mean, doesn't that create a downward spiral?
Absolutely.
I don't put any investment in, there are no new jobs. But interestingly enough, for China, it could be a silver lining in this massive dark cloud because China has the production capability. If no one is building...
And the domestic market.
And the domestic market. But if no one overseas is building anything to satisfy, even if it's a lesser demand, I mean, factories go out of business, have gone out of business during the recession, during the pandemic. So at this juncture, they're going to be more reliant on the existing manufacturing base, which is still China.
Which is actually Asia with China at its core.
Yeah.
Because Southeast Asia is very much integrated into this now.
Do you think this is what Li has been seeing as Vice Premier Li has been seeing when he says that we have to that China needs to concentrate on exports, that this is going to be the mechanism to prime the pump to get things working, get people back to work, get small, medium-sized enterprises going, get higher wages, and then which can fuel the consumption cycle?
We've seen it. Japan has negative trade numbers. China has had very strong, in fact, record-breaking trade positive numbers for the last 4 or 5 months. And it's exports, because of the supply chain's completeness and the manufacturing capacity that exists. I think in terms of the U.S. is still a major economy, but how much is manufacturing? It's all services. It's 80% services.
Yeah, but services don't exist on themselves. People make that mistake.
Yeah.
All right. Unless you're producing something, there's nothing to service. Finance is a service.
Yeah.
But if there's no one investing,
there's no service.
There's no service. Yeah. I mean, tax, everything like that. They're there.
Let's say, I think we're going into a recession already.
Okay.
Right. That's
how
number
long?
one. Now, how long depends on a number of things. I think depends on whether or not the European situation stabilizes, Russia and Ukraine. Because if things don't stabilize, Germany is already, household consumption of natural gas, cost has gone up 300% or more.
And they're about to run out of the reserves.
That's right.
In the next
and the Russians
few weeks.
are about to cut off.
Well, I mean, there's this ridiculous idea that the U.S. can dictate the price of oil that is paid to Russia. That is a little weird.
Yeah.
I mean, the Russians are demanding money in rubles. I don't even know how that would work.
Then also in Japan, if you think about this, more than 10% of Japan's use of natural gas comes from Russia, LNG, Sakhalin.
Yeah, but they haven't boycotted.
They haven't boycotted. They can't afford to boycott.
Yeah, but these are the realities. But I mean,
but guess what Putin has just done? He nationalized this company.
Oh, he did.
He did. He already signed the presidential order to nationalize it.
Yeah, but Japan at the same time that they have this 10% reliance, they also have been making noises about disputed islands, that there had been close. Yes, they had been close to a resolution, and now all of a sudden...
Forget that now.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is that the nationalization of this gas companies, Sakhalin, in Russia, I think Sumitomo and Mitsubishi own about 25-30% of this company. So that's a little signal that, guess what?
Well, Putin is fighting back. People put sanctions on him. He's going to necessarily
respond.
He's going to respond. You corner the bear. Don't be surprised
Yeah.
if it fights you.
I think the situation can get worse in a couple months' time. Not only in terms of the economy, but it's becoming a game of who can survive longer. Is it Russia
War of
or
attrition.
Europe?
War
That's right.
of attrition. But the U.S. is in there, and unfortunately, so is the rest of the world.
Yeah,
South America, Africa,
Yeah.
Everyone's going to suffer,
that's right.
including India.
That's right.
And they have real issues. I mean, they're buying cheaper oil, but if they have a poor harvest coming up, it's going to be
Food
difficult.
problems. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed that they have been exporting exporting grains to other countries. Whether that comes back to bite the administration, if they have a poor things, is going to be seen. All right, we've talked about so many aspects. Republicans versus Democrats, election issues, rulings on abortion, guns, the January 6th hearings, and pocketbook issues. What's going to decide these next coming midterms? Is it the economics of people suffering and saying I'm paying more than $5 for gas? Or is it the social issues and the guns, Roe versus Wade?
I think
January
the
6th,
social
everything?
issues and the religious issues and all of those will sort of cancel each other out.
Okay.
And what's left finally on the table
Economics.
is going to be economics.
All right, well, we'll be talking about this more. So
Plenty
until
more.
then,